As a new hand spinner, one of the things that improved my spinning the most out of all the things I did was spinning with intention. And what I mean by that is actually having a project in mind and designing and spinning the yarn to meet that project. So in this video, I'm going to talk about spinning sock yarn with intention. Socks are a great project for hand spinning because you need a relatively small amount of fibre to actually get a finished product, and after all, who doesn't love knitting socks? If you're new here, my name is Becca and I'm a hand spinner, knitter and newbie weaver, and you're very welcome to my little fibre arts corner of my home in West Wales. If you're an old friend, welcome back. So there are a few stages in designing our sock yarn. We want to consider fibre selection, what are we actually going to spin them with, then how we're going to spin it, how we're going to ply it, and how we're going to finish it. So let's start with fibre selection. So socks are next to the skin, so we do have to consider that. So we don't want anything that's too hairy or too coarse. They have to work really hard because, let's face it, they're on our feet, and that's a kind of hard working part of the body. And they also need to have plenty of stretch and bounce. Wool has all those properties and it's an absolutely ideal fibre. It isn't actually that long ago that all socks would have been hand knitted, and look, 200 years ago, and particularly in Wales, they were known for their socks and their hosiery because they had the right sort of wool to make really good socks. And that wool is a down type of wool. So that includes things like Shetland, Lynne, we've spun quite a lot of down wools recently on the channel, so quite a lot of the mountain breeds would be classed as a down type of wool, which is quite a low luster, lots of crimp, so it's very springy and probably on the medium side, so it's quite hard wearing. If you're a new hand spinner, a medium fibre is quite an easy fibre to spin, and when we say medium, we're talking about the individual width of each fibre, and you either get that from the spin count, which it'll be a figure with an S on the end, or the micron count, which is with a funny squiggly little M on the end of the figure. And it really does depend on what part of the world you're from as to what's used. And I think these days actually both are used. So you'll quite often see when you're going to buy fibre that they'll talk about a figure with an S and a figure with an M. So our next consideration is spinning, and how are we going to spin it? So are we going to spin a worsted style or a woolen style? Classically, socks are spun in a worsted style. In spinning, when we talk about a worsted style, that's a combed preparation, so combed top, and a worsted style of spin, which is a short forward draw. It can be spinning off the fold, but more normally it's a short forward draw, and you're smoothing down all the fibres and you are not letting the twist run into your drafting triangle. And I will get the wheel out and show you in a minute what I mean by that. One of the other things we need to consider is plying, and classically socks are made with a 3-ply yarn, and I am most definitely on record for saying I prefer a 2-ply yarn. Both work. There are pros and cons to both. It is much easier to get a sock weight yarn with a 2-ply, and I only have 2 whirls on my spinning wheel because it's a 1980s Ashford traditional, and I find it easier to get a sock weight yarn using a 2-ply spun on my smaller whirl. And if none of that makes sense, hopefully when I show you what I'm doing on the spinning wheel, it will. So I say I'm on record for saying I prefer 2-ply yarns. That was until last year when I took part in the sock spin along that Carrie hosts on My Wool Mitten, and I will link the channel below. And I think she's done it a couple of times. I don't know whether she's doing it this year, but as a kind of experiment, I thought I would try a 3-ply yarn again because I'd literally not spun it in years. And this is the result. And I think I'm a little bit converted. So I've got this fibre to spin up for a pair of socks for Andrew, and I have been experimenting with the 2-ply. and I'll show you those experiments in a moment. But I am thinking that I'm going to do a sample and actually spin 3-ply because I really like the way this looks, and this has been washed and worn and it comes back to shape really well. So on the channel I have spun quite a lot of sock yarn, it has to be said, and this was one of the early ones, and this was a space dyed Lynne, which is a type of sheep roving that I then spun and plied 2-ply and knitted up, and this was a balanced yarn opposed to this, which is Cambrian wool, and I will put all the links for the different companies in the description below. This is Cambrian wool, which is a mule. It is a cross between the local Welsh mountain sheep and a BFL, so the ram is a blue-faced Leicester, and you get a mule type of sheep, and they produce a really nice general purpose wool, and I have found this to be an excellent sock wool. And also I think because it's 3-ply and I put lots and lots of twist in it, so it's really energized, you can see how well it has bounced back into shape in comparison to that. So the other sock I'm going to show you is this one, and this was spun without intention. So this was just demonstrating colours, and there was quite a lot of quite fine fibre in it, and of course what's happened is it's gone into holes really quickly. It's a bit felted and it's shrunk a little bit, despite the fact that I've given it quite a gentle wash. It kind of has not really performed particularly well. I probably didn't give it a gentle enough wash, because of what I want out of a pair of socks is I want to be able to put them in the washing machine on a wool wash, and I've been able to do that with both of these, and these have both performed really well. So the other sock yarn that I spun up and I've just started knitting is a Shetland, and you can see how incredibly energized and one would say overspun this is, and that was really intentional. And I'm trying to really find my perfect sock yarn, I think it's fair to say. And this came from World of Wool. It is a Shetland with a little bit of bio nylon in it. And that is one of the things that you can do. You can actually mix another fibre in with your wool to give it a little bit of extra strength. Bio nylon is an option, silk is an option, alpaca is a good option. So between 10 and 20% of your fibre can be one of those extra things that's going to give it a little bit of strength. So I think the channel's about 18 months old, and these are sort of the sock projects I've done in the last 18 months. Right, so on to this week's project. It's quite possible that you have seen me making these on my blending board, and I was sampling for colour. Now I'm sampling for spin and for ply, and I will just show you how I got on a couple of days ago. I've got a little bit of something I spun a few days ago on here, so I'm just going to attach onto that, and I have my spinning control card. Can sit there. Right, let's have a look at these rolags. Just going to pre-draft a little bit. Now for a worsted yarn you wouldn't normally spin off a rolag, but by using a worsted spinning style I can get a pretty good almost worsted yarn. It's not going to be as smooth and dense as if I was spinning off a worsted preparation, so a combed preparation, but it's going to be all right for my purposes. And I'm spinning on my smaller whirl. So I'm doing a short forward draw and smoothing down all those little fibres, so I've got a really nice, smooth, relatively even yarn. Consistency and evenness is a very personal thing. I'm not that bothered by it, but for sock yarns, obviously you do want something that's got a bit of consistency to it. Right, let's just check what sort of tension I've got. Okay, so that is a bit fierce, I think. Just spin a bit more. So I have adjusted the tension so that the wheel is drawing the spun single in a little bit faster. So it's putting less twist in before it goes onto the bobbin. And that should make it less twisty when we ply it and do a ply back test. So you want quite a lot of twist in a sock yarn. I mean, that's still going to be pretty, it's going to be pretty kind of bouncy and quite tightly spun, but I think that's better than it was. So I won't change this tension until I've done my sample, so that I actually know I'm getting the right tension. So if you are really not sure about which whirl you should be using, just do lots of samples. That's the only way you will ever know. But good rule of thumb is the thicker you want your finished yarn to be, the bigger whirl you use. And if you keep that in mind and do a bit of practicing and sampling, you will sort of come up with the right whirl for what you're looking for, and you will get used to which whirl produces the yarn you're after. I've only got 2 whirls. That's because this is a vintage Ashford traditional, mid-1980s, and so they were made with 2 whirls. I could update this and I could get more whirls, I could get different flyer, but you know, I'm a cheapskate, so I haven't done it. And also I'm not that bothered by it, you know, I'm spinning the yarn I want to spin. I think it's actually a bit too tight. That's just kind of, it's not quite. Okay, that feels better. That feels about right. And these days I really do spin by feel, just because I've been spinning on this wheel for so long that I just know. I know the way it feels and I know the way it spins, and I spin a lot of this type of fibre. This fibre is mostly the locally produced from Cambrian Wools mule, meaning that it will be the local Welsh mountain sheep crossed with a BFL ram, and it produces a really nice fibre that is, you know, you can use it for lots of projects. It's very versatile and it's really good for socks. Well, I think it's really good for socks. Okay, so let's just have let's just have a look at the spinning control card. So this is, so that is, and that's, honestly, that's not luck, that's just because I've done this a lot of times, and really just, you want to make the yarn of your dreams. Practice, practice, practice. There is no substitute for it. Just gotta get those reps in. It's like anything. Just gotta keep practicing and practicing and practicing. And ones that I'm not good at are because I just don't practice them. So I keep getting asked for like how to spin on a drop spindle. And well, I do know how to spin on a drop spindle because it's what I started with. I literally haven't picked a drop spindle up in nearly 20 years. And so when I come to try, it's, you know, a bit hopeless. And so I've made the decision, actually, I'm not interested in spinning on a drop spindle. It doesn't float my boat. And there are other people who are regular spindle spinners who can do a much better demonstration than I ever can. And I just wouldn't enjoy doing it because I don't do it. And I don't do it because I'd rather spin on the wheel. So that is sort of why I don't. But obviously, if it did float my boat, then what I'd have to do was just sit there and spin and spin and spin and spin and spin until it was second nature. And then your hands just know what to do. And I've said this before, I'm not a flock of wheels type of person. I love this wheel. This is Geraldine, by the way, if you don't know her name. And she has got a bit of lateral movement on her these days, and I really probably should replace the bearings. But I'm a bit scared because I think I might do it wrong. So I kind of, back when I lived close to my spinning teacher, who was an Ashford dealer, I would just have taken it in there and she would have done it for me. But now I don't live near an Ashford dealer. I'm like, oh, I don't know, a bit frightened. What if I break her? So I just put up with the sort of slight lateral movement and try not to worry too much about it. I mean, there will be a time where it'll just be too bad and I will actually have to bite the bullet and do something about it. But at the moment, I'm pretending it's not there. Nothing to see here. It's fine. I have also been flirting with a joy wheel. I'd quite like a joy wheel, really. So what I've done, I have just knitted up a little sample on a couple of different size needles just to see, get this organised, to see how they look. And those are 2-ply. And so my next job, when I finish doing this, is to do a sample that's 3-ply. And I also, when I was spinning this, I was making sure it was really energised. So I've got plenty of twist in it. Okay, I've got a couple of skeins just hanging off the ceiling hooks in my conservatory. And I'm going to try and show you what I mean by a balanced yarn and an energised yarn. So this is some boré. And if you look at the way it's hanging, that would be a balanced yarn. Now next to it, we've got the sock yarn I've just spun, so I shall just change positions without making you seasick. So I've put more twist in that yarn, and so you can see it's twistier, if that makes sense. That kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah, so it's an energised yarn. I could have put more in, but there is a point when it's over twisted and it gets a bit ropey. But you can get away with quite a lot with sock yarn, but that to me is about perfect, really. I mean, maybe a little bit more energy, a little bit more twist, but I don't want it too rope-like. There you go. And you can just see that this is just hanging. I don't weight my yarns. I know you'll see in a lot of books people telling you to weight your yarns. Personally, I don't think it improves them. Anyway, just thought I'd show you that. So by having what you might consider an over twisted yarn. I mean, you don't want it ropey. I mean, you can go too far, but you want it energized. So hopefully by having it energized, I'm going to have this kind of very stretchy, bouncy knit that just pulls back into shape, opposed to this, which does have some stretch and it does spring back, but not as effectively as this 3-ply made with, I would consider, a crimpier type of fibre. Right, so let's talk about patterns and patterns for using your handspun. I have been knitting this very old sock pattern for about 20 years, and it has been in a folder, but it's getting a bit kind of wrinkly. And this was written for opal sock yarn, so it wasn't written for handspun, but it works absolutely fine. So if you've got a pattern that you really like, then I would suggest that you should be aiming to make a yarn that you can knit on that pattern. The other patterns I've been experimenting with is from Spin to Knit. Sorry, it is now out of print, but you can get it. There's lots of secondhand copies out there. And the Pippi sock, that is a 2-ply DK weight pattern, and I've knitted that. That's a good one. Then we've got the Twisted Sister sock workbook. Again, it's out of print, but you can get secondhand copies really easily, and it's a really in-depth look on how to make sock yarn. I can highly recommend it. It's just so much great information and lots of different ways of knitting socks. The other book I'm going to recommend to you is Design Your Own Knits. Again, it's an older book. You can tell when I did my book buying, can't you? But there are lots and lots of secondhand copies, and it has a sort of how to knit socks or how to design socks pattern that works really well, and I will be using this to design a pattern for the socks that I'm going to knit for Andrew, because obviously his foot's a different size to mine and I'm very used to knitting a sock pattern that works for my feet. And I probably will try and make some videos about that process rather than and they'll be like process videos rather than how-to videos. So just one last thing. Normally my newsletter comes out on a Tuesday. However, I'm going to change it to a Thursday so that I can include a sort of a list of learnings and takeaways from the Wednesday video in a Thursday newsletter. So if you are on the newsletter, then it will be out tomorrow if you're watching this in kind of real time. And if you would like to join the newsletter, then I will leave a link in the description below. And it is just my thoughts on things that you can do to improve your hand spinning, project ideas for you, and just a little bit of news about the channel. So it would be really lovely to have you join that. I hope you found that useful, and I hope it inspires you to have your end project in mind before you start to spin. So there's now only one thing left for me to say. May your needles be swift and your yarns be soft, and I will see you next time.